All right, everybody, we're going to get started. Thanks again for joining us, and we will be underway immediately.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Fun with Formatting. So quickly, I just wanted to address a few housekeeping items. First, we will be providing the recording of this webinar and the slide deck in an email to everyone that's registered after we're done. And also, all of our webinars live on our YouTube channel, so never fear, you will get it. Second, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the box labeled questions. We will be answering questions at the end. Also, if we don't get to your question, we will be posting a blog post with all of the questions and answers. So don't worry about that either. And last, we always want to hear your feedback. And if you have any ideas for future webinar content, that's kind of how we decided this topic for the webinar. So please email us at webinar@lulu.com.
Webinar.
Okay.
Okay.
Webinar@lulu.com. We'll put the email on the last slide, so you'll be fine. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us. Today we're going to discuss best practices and steps for formatting your project for bookstore quality, specifically using Microsoft Word. And we wanted to focus on Word because it's the most popular writing software in the world, and most of the books on Lulu are created with Word. Plus, it's an incredible writing tool. You can track changes, you can add comments, and it doesn't require the internet to use it. And of course, it allows you to transform your manuscript into a print-ready PDF. Even though today we are focusing on Word, any software that can create a PDF will work. If you do have questions about using other software, feel free to contact our support team at lulu.com/support. So let's meet the team. So I am Lolly Zamowski. I am the social media manager.
My name is Paul Hobday. I'm the senior copywriter.
I'm Chelsea Bennett. I am the marketing communications specialist.
I am Graham Williams, and I'm the email marketing manager.
And I'm Lauren Vasallo. I'm the marketing associate.
Awesome. So for those of you who don't know us, we are Lulu Press. We are a self-publishing and print-on-demand platform. We were founded by authorpreneur Bob Young, who also founded Red Hat, if you don't know. We are located in Durham, North Carolina. We are a small but mighty team. And we are also a B Corporation. So we are committed to making the world better, one book at a time. So now I will pass it over to Chelsea to really dive into the good stuff. Thanks.
No, not yet. Paul is going to get into the really good stuff. I'm gonna kick it off with some precursor good stuff. Okay, cool. So as you guys know at this point, this webinar is about formatting, but writing is not formatting, so it's pretty obvious. But we did want to start off to note that writing does not equal formatting. So we're going to give you some tips on what you want to do before you even get to the formatting step. Okay, so before you do any formatting, write the entire manuscript, edit and revise, and do a final comprehensive review. So I know that it looks like 3 steps, but obviously there's a lot that goes into these things. You want to get all of your copy editing, your line editing, the content editing, all of that done. Obviously the entire manuscript, that will take some time, and then your final comprehensive review. So essentially what you should be bringing to the formatting table is the completed final manuscript. If you try to start the formatting process before these edits and revisions are completed, you will be basically wasting your time. There's a lot of things that can move around with these edits and things that you may not even really anticipate. So it's just important to make sure that when you start formatting, you are good to go. That book is ready. It's done. You're done with it at that time. Alrighty, so to get to that point, you're going to want to gather your content. Here's a beautiful example of front and back matter. You want to have all this ready when you go to begin formatting. So I love this example. I came across this book in our bookstore a couple weeks ago, and they just did such a fantastic job. So I was excited to show it to you guys. We have these really nice little diagrams here that are showing you the front matter and then the back matter. So when you're gathering your content, that's going to include those things I just named. So front matter, the body of the book, obviously, any images or tables you're going to want to use in the content, and then your back matter. So on the next slide, we're going to touch on what front matter includes, but really quickly, back matter is going to be your acknowledgments, your dedication, chapter previews if you have another book coming out, and your about the author info. So those are all great little back matter tidbits that you might want to include at the end of the book. And so for front matter, so here's some suggested front matter that we have here. This is all kind of standard procedures. So, you know, I trust all of you can read, but I'm going to go through it anyway. So your half title, blank page, your full title, copyright page, which is important, obviously, any dedications or acknowledgments that you want in the front, your blank pages, table of contents, and then the first page of the content. So you can see these are all kind of some standard front matter that you may be looking to. This is our recommendation, but you can find a ton of examples on Google if you're looking for something more specific to your project. So, okay, without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Paul, who's going to share his screen with all the hot and juicy formatting tips you guys came here for.
All right, give me just a second to get this minimized and we'll switch over. All right, so right now what you're seeing is a pretty basic Word document here. What I have is the A5 interior template that Lulu offers. You can grab this when you're creating your book on lulu.com. It's just a very simple Word file sized and with the margins preset for you. So what I'm doing with that file is I'm going to create a copy of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll's classic. I just grabbed this off of Gutenberg for free. It's a public access book that's out there. So I've taken all of the contents and dropped them into this A5 template. And then I did go ahead and I saved it. And you'll notice as we go through at the top of my files here, you'll see a different title for each of these that I go through. It's very important to save often, so make sure you're doing that throughout the process. Even if you see me not saving, anytime you're making a move, you're changing something, it's always good to save. So right now I have this file pulled from the PDF that was created for Gutenberg. It is completely raw. It is just normal text copy throughout the whole file. You'll see here the style that I'm using right now is normal. I've used Trebuchet size 11 for my basic font. Now, I will say I love this font for web viewing, but when you go to print, I would not suggest this font. So I've chose it today to make it a little easier to see on the screen. But when you are creating a print book, be sure to really look at how that's going to appear on your PDF file so that it looks good printed. I don't think I've ever heard of a book printed in Trebuchet. So yeah, not a great one for printing. So I've got my file. Everything is unformatted, completely normal format style, excuse me. And the first thing I want to do is I want to toggle on this little Pilcrow button here. What that does is it reveals non-printing characters. So you'll see all these little blue marks here. And if you look really, really closely, you'll see little blue dots between words. These are non-printing characters that are going to show you formatting elements you've added to your file that won't print. These are really important for when you're doing file formatting so that you can make sure everything is laid out correctly. So the other thing we want to do before we dive too deep into formatting our file is check our format set or our page setup. So that's under the file menu, and everyone should know I'm using Word for Mac, the 2016 edition. Everybody's version based on Mac or PC and the year that the Word release came out, it's going to vary a little bit. So you may need to, go to Office's website and check where some of these menus live on your version of Word. But everything we're going to use today exists within, the most common versions of Word 2010 or 7 and up. So I'm going to go to my page setup real quick, and we're going to see the first thing we notice is under paper size here, it says other. So it's important to make sure that the paper size you use is named. And you'll see I've got a bunch of them saved in here already, kind of prepared for doing books on Lulu. If you go to manage custom sizes and click this little plus button here, you can create new sizes and then define the margins and the size of the paper. So the reason to do this, and I'm going to just go up here and select A5 with bleed for our print ready file, and you'll see that selected here. Okay. The reason we want to do that is to make sure that when Word exports this file, and we'll touch on this again a little later, when we export it to make a PDF, it needs to have a named page size or Word is going to revert it to 8.5 by 11. It's one of those weird little glitches that Word's never really worked out. I don't know if maybe there's a reason for it that I'm unaware of, but always very, very carefully review that page setup. The other thing that's important to review before you get too far into it is your formatting. And I'm going to go under the format menu here, and we've got these first four are the most important ones, and even more so than that, the paragraph and document are really key to look at. We go to document, and we see our margins and that we're mirroring them. So these margin sizes are kind of up to you. I recommend at least a ½ inch, but you can size them how you want. This will change how the content is nested in the file, so you have some white space and some margins. And then our gutter margin to give us a little extra space in the center of the book when it folds open so you don't lose any of the text. And when I mirror those, which we see here, it creates that gutter effect in the center of the page so that the book's copy all looks the same and uniform throughout the book. The other one to look at is the paragraph formatting, and this is going to have the indentation, the line spacing, a whole bunch of options here. We also have some line and page break options, widow and orphan control. That's a really kind of advanced level word formatting element, and I'll probably go into that in a future blog post or video somewhere on the site. It's one of those things that we don't really have the time to get into. It's a very specialized thing, but we'll see a couple instances of where it might have mattered for this book as I start formatting it. And so we'll circle back to that on a later date. All right, so we've got our file and we're ready to start formatting it. So the first thing we want to do is add Frontmatter. I'm going to work from the guide that we had in our slide deck there that Chelsea mentioned. And I want to create initial pages, title, half title, copyright, all of that. The way I'm going to do that is by adding breaks. So you'll see up here in this little quick access menu I have on my version of Word, I've added this button. Tooltip's going to show up. There we go. Insert a page break and insert a section break. And to be more accurate, that insert a section break is going to insert section break next page. I highly recommend using the next page section break until you're very, very comfortable with breaks and word formatting to understand how some of the continuous or left and right page breaks work. Next page break is simply going to stop the page where you insert that and move to the next. And we're going to see that real quick here. So I've got my cursor on this line right below the title. I'm going to insert a page break. Now we see this copy right here. This is a non-printing character as well. If I turn this off, it disappears. That's just telling us that we broke the page. So now we have our half title. It's just the title of the book on the first page. I'm going to go ahead and real quickly copy that and add it here again. And now what I want to do is create a blank page. So I'm going to insert another page break. And so now we have half title and a blank page. Next, we want our full title, which is going to be the title and the author. We'll go ahead and break again. And so on and so forth, using breaks, and specifically page breaks and not section breaks for the Frontmatter. We're doing this to create space on the page and define those individual pages that we saw in that list that Chelsea was showing on the slide deck for all of the different pieces we need to see for the Frontmatter of our book. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close out this file and jump to one where I've finished inserting the Frontmatter. Note that I'm not going to save this. It's going to pop up a little menu and tell me I should. We're just not going to do that. You should always save. And even more than that, when you're making formatting changes, it's good to save different versions. So save, version 1, version 2, version 3. That way, if you break something or if the formatting just goes crazy on you, you can back up a little bit. All right, so we're out of here. We're into my second file. And we'll see I've labeled this one to Frontmatter. And we've got all my page breaks in here. If I scroll down, here is some copyright material. So I went to Creative Commons and grabbed a public domain copyright. And I went ahead and did a little acknowledgement that this is still Lewis Carroll's work and that I'm identifying it as being free of known copyright restrictions. And scroll down a little further, I've got a dedication to my boss. I've got a little placeholder I put in here for the table of contents. So we're going to do the table of contents at the very end once we're done all the formatting. But for the time being, it is worthwhile to just type out something here, even if it says placeholder, TOC, table of contents, and do that extra page break. You're just reserving this page for later on. And if I scroll down further, we see the first page of actual content. So here we have our primary pieces of content starting. What we're going to want to do is get all of this formatted and prepared so that we can then break it up and do the important header and footer formatting to get this book really finalized. And before I dive into the final format or the layout formatting for this copy, I want to show two additional elements, and I'm going to use this extra blank page here to do it. Two things that are done often in print books that don't always apply to novels and the like, but are important to note that Word has the functionality for. The first one is going to be inserting an image. So if you notice, I've got the insert menu here, and then Mac has this upper menu too for inserting. On Macs, this menu tends to be more in-depth with a lot more options, whereas the ribbon menu, the Word one, still has a lot of options, but it doesn't give you quite as many as that top level one. But for the most part, they're very much the same. So I'm going to click Pictures and from File. And we're going to see I'm opening this file I've created for this webinar, and I have this Alice in Wonderland PNG. And this is just a free image of the rabbit from Alice in Wonderland that I've grabbed and I'm inserting here. So you'll notice it's ringed in with a text box and I can resize it. Don't do that. If you are inserting an image into Word, the last thing you want to do is allow Word to touch it. You want to size it the way you want it sized. You want to prepare it exactly as you want it prepared and then insert it. When you start messing around with resizing and changing the image within Word, Word is going to do all kinds of weird stuff to it when it exports, and you really just don't want that. The biggest thing they're going to do is compress it. They're going to make it lower DPI, lower dots per inch, which is going to affect the resolution and potentially affect the print quality. The important thing to note is the text wrapping. It inserted as in line with text, which means the image is on a line of text. You have options about how to change that up. Wrap text around it in like a magazine style. You can put it behind or in front of some text. I don't advise getting into this too much with Word. Word is not well suited to this level of formatting. That's more of like an InDesign type of formatting thing, but you can. Just make sure you're testing, and when you're exporting your PDF, you're really checking out those pages with images. But for a simple image like this, if you just wanted to have something to spruce up the page a little bit, it's pretty easy to do, and it's in there. You can go back to the home menu and move it around with centering, things like that. There's a fair amount of control. Okay, I'm going to delete that, and one more piece that I want to just show on this page before we move on is a table. So again, I'm under that insert menu and I'm going to click table, and it just lets me kind of pick the specs of the table that I want. I'm going to go ahead and just make a small one here. A couple of important things you can do. You can treat this very much like anyone that knows Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, very similar. You've got some basic designs that you can pick to arrange how it looks and how it appears. And then also under this layout tab, so you notice the ribbon shows you a design and layout for tables here. So if I go to this one, I can add another cell at the top. I can insert one to the side. And I can also, if I wanted to make, say, a header row, I can merge those into one. And then I can start adding my content here. So I'm going to just do a history of Alice in Wonderland. And then if I wanted to, I could go through and I could put in the date 1862, according to Wikipedia, is the year that Lewis Carroll dreamt up the story. And there it is. I can mess around with the sizing of these, and you'll notice because I've merged that top row, it's staying separate from these other ones. Word has pretty good controls for manipulating small tables like this. As long as you're just putting some text in your table or small images, and it's not stretching or it's not having to go multiple pages, it's pretty easy to manipulate. So any small tables, anything like that that you want to do in there is pretty doable with Word. If you're doing something more in depth, the graph, those kinds of things, I usually recommend creating a JPEG or a PNG file, an image file, and inserting it that way. Or if it's more complex than any of those options, you really need to be getting into something like InDesign or numerous other kinds of page layout tools, publishing tools that will help you really take control of that. Word is a little bit limited on how many options it gives you for that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that, and we're going to move on to doing the actual formatting of our copy. So the next thing we want to do now that we've got our front matter inserted is define styles. So styles are how we're going to change up different pieces of text. If you open a novel, you'll notice a lot of times the chapter title, which I've got here, won't be the same font, won't be the same size as our body text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this as heading 1. And if you are looking at your own Microsoft Word files, you might notice a lot of styles listed, block copy, and no space and spacing and all kinds of different things. I've deleted a bunch of those just to simplify this for right now. The main ones you're going to work with when you're editing are going to be normal for the majority of your text, and then heading 1, heading 2, and maybe heading 3 or 4, depending on how many different styles you want to use. So I've got my title for this chapter here. I'm going to go ahead and put it in heading 2. So that jumped right out and it added it as size 14 bold, still trebuchet. But let's say I don't want to do it that way. I want to change it up here. So maybe what I'll do is I'll go ahead and change it to, let's go with Baskerville. Let's scroll down through my list. And these are all fonts that Word has built into them. So they're already built into Word. Really easy to access them. And I think I might go with size 22. Maybe I want to go italic, and let's center it. And I hit OK. And now we've styled that so it looks a little different. Now let's say I want to clean this up so it looks more nicely centered. I'm going to put my cursor right before the title, between chapter and title, and do a soft return, which is when you hit Shift and Enter. And what that does is it creates a line space, and you'll notice this little arrow here. That's another non-printing character showing a soft return. It creates a line break, but it keeps these two lines bound together. So this is still being treated as a single line by Word for formatting purposes, but they're separated on the page. The other thing we can do with our styles is mess around with some of the spacing. So here we're going to go into the paragraph and back to this indents and spacing. And let's say I want to have my chapter titles have a lot of space around my title on that page. And you'll see this pretty often, especially in like fantasy books. They'll create some space. And so as I do that, it just generates space. Creates a gap here before we get down there. Maybe I want to put a little image or something in there. This would also be the point when I could do things like adding drop caps. I'm not going to go too deep into that. You can find it in, it's in this insert menu here. That's another one of those kind of advanced ones that maybe we'll touch on in a future look at some Word features. But and you'll see as we go through this, I've added drop caps to the next few files that we look at. All right, so I've added my chapter 1 section here. I'm going to scroll down and find chapter 2. Now here's chapter 2. And before I style this, we want to think about how we're going to set up the file in the long run. What I've decided I want to do is I want my header to have Lewis Carroll's name on one side and the chapter title on the other. That means each chapter's header is going to be slightly different because it needs to have that title. Chapter 1 will say Down the Rabbit Hole at the top, and chapter 2 will say The Pool of Tears, which is a very sad title. So what we need to do is we need to break this so that this chapter 2 starts on a new page, because I'm sure most of you know, reading a book, you don't often see the chapters just running continuously on the same page. But we're also going to need to make chapter 2 different than chapter 1. So what I'm going to do is instead of a page break, which is this command I use for the Frontmatter, I'm actually going to use a section break. And so let me just scroll back up here, and you'll notice this bit of non-printing character stuff right here. The section break I inserted is on this last line of text for chapter 1. So I'm going to just go ahead and hit return just so you can see it. Either position is okay. And if this text was down near the bottom of the page, it can actually be important to keep the break on the line so that it doesn't push that page break to the next page. Oftentimes, if you export a PDF and you see a weird blank page at the end of a chapter and you don't know where it came from, it's because that section or page break is on its own line and it's being pushed to the next page when you create your PDF. So you'll see I've sectioned off my file. If I scroll down here and click in the header, double click in the header, you'll notice these previous pages are section 1. This is section 2. So what we're going to do as we move forward is design sections for each chapter so that they all have their own unique headers. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close out this file. This is another point where you would start saving. And we've got this file, number 3, labeled breaks. And let me just scroll down real quick here. Oops, I didn't get my formatting. We'll notice when I get into the next one, all the chapter titles will be formatted. I backed it out on this one for the breaks. So you'll see here, section break. We're going to scroll down, find chapter 3 start, and there's another section break. and going ahead and click in there again. So you see how I did that and it moved it? It's because I created space in that header and the break is on its own line. If I back this up and put it there, we'll notice it stays. That's that instance where it's really important to be aware of where that break is. If I had left it on that separate line the way it was originally, when I create a PDF, there would be a blank page before chapter 3. So that's really important to be aware of. All right, and you'll notice I've got my sections here. Okay. And so now that we've got these sections inserted, what we want to do is start adding content to my header. So I'm going to just go back up and find the first section we want to work with, which is a little too far. So chapter 1. So what I want is Lewis Carroll in that header. And you'll notice it popped up both the same here. So what we need to do is we need to define that this header is different on odd and even pages. And when I do that, you notice immediately the Lewis Carroll on the other page goes away. Call this one down rabbit hole. And so we've made these different. The other thing that's notable is you'll see that these have been added to section 1 as well, which we don't want. This is our front matter here. Let me just get out of the header so we don't have those menus showing. As I scroll through, we're in section 2 or chapter 2, we see it's showing up there as well. We've added this everywhere. The reason is because they are all linked. So when you go through and you insert your section breaks, it's vital that you unlink them. And it's unfortunate that Microsoft has decided to make that a default because the vast majority of the time you don't want these linked. If I kept these linked, when I go to my next chapter, right. Oh goodness, I scrolled by it. Apologies. Here we go. Chapter 2, and I go to add Pool of Tears. We'll notice it linked it into chapter 1, and that's because they're linked to the previous. So my advice is, as you scroll through and put your section breaks in to define the sections for each chapter, you immediately go through and unlink every single one. And it's easier to unlink them before you define them as separate for odd and even. If you do this first, if you check this box first, you have to unlink left and right. Oops. If you don't check this first, you can do them at the same time. So little things like that. And this is really a key point. When you get ready to start inserting multiple sections with multiple header styles, where the copy is going to differ from heading to heading, and you're going to have page numbers, make sure you insert all your breaks, go back to the beginning of the file, scroll through, click into each section's header, footer, left and right page, odd and even page, check them all. Just really carefully verify. At this point, with 13 chapters in this story, plus our front matter, we end up with 14 sections split on odd and even pages. That's 28 separate instances that could be linked. If you miss even one of those, it can throw off the entire process. So you really, really, really got to be careful with that. And if anyone knows a way that you can default Word to shutting that off, I'd be happy to know it because I've never been able to find one. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close this one out as well, and we're gonna jump into one with a little bit more of the work done. So here we are, we're looking at my title here again, and we'll notice it looks a little different. What I did was I went ahead and defined a heading 1 style for my title. Now, if you remember earlier, I mentioned that I did heading 2 for my chapter titles. That's gonna become important when we look at how we set up the table of contents. So I went ahead and used copperplate 24 bold centered for my title. I just like that, I think it makes a nice clean title. It's all caps. I'm gonna scroll down here to my half title or my full title, and we'll notice I did the author's name in the same with some nice spacing. This will look really nice when it comes to a print PDF. It's gonna be just a little below the margin on the top with lots of white space there. Got some space for dedication, table of contents still. And then here is my chapter 1, ready to go with the heading styles included. And I've got a nice little drop cap I threw in there. Again, we'll touch on that in a future article on the blog or something. We'll look at some of those advanced features to really stylize that the way you want. And then if I click into my header here, oh, I didn't unlink that one. Oh, I didn't do it right. Okay, fix that. So we've got these set, and we could go ahead and start adding in our heading styles throughout. Go ahead and move on to one that has that defined. This is the same file. Headings are all set up. There's our Frontmatter, and ooh, look at that. There is the title. And notice Lewis Carroll's name is not showing up on this page, even though I want to have it appear. Oh, and there it is on the next one. What I've done is for this section, which is section 2, chapter 1, I've checked this different first page. I usually wait and do that after I've added the content. If I were to uncheck it, it would just put his name right back up there. Oftentimes you'll see that some of the formatting is different on these chapter title pages. It just looks a little cleaner without something in the header on that page. Totally optional, works however you want to do it. But then as I scroll down, we'll see his title is in, or his name is in there on the next one. And if we keep scrolling, here's where we break for chapter 2, and we notice no name on this one again. We're into section 3 here, and again, different first page. If I scroll down, name and the chapter title. And I'm just going to really quickly jump down kind of further into the book a little bit, and we got into chapter 8, Queen's Croquet Ground, name, everything is there. It's all flowed through. This was all manually done. I went through and typed this in on each header so that it's here. I also went and made sure to check all of the right boxes and unlink everything. There isn't a great non-manual way to do this if we want different content in the headers. If we were just putting Lewis Carroll on this side and Alice's Adventures in Wonderland on the other, we wouldn't need to section each chapter off. We could just use a regular page break, let the contents of your story all be one section and have the same header. We wouldn't be able to have a different first page for each chapter though. So there's a lot of really granular controls you have to think about when you're using these styles. All right, scroll back up here. So what we're going to look at next, now that we've got these header content added, is page numbers. Oh, and I apologize. I'm actually going to back up 1 second. There's one more thing I want to show in the header. What I've done here is I've created another style, and it's called header content. I'm going to go ahead and right click and modify that. This is just, it's a little bit bigger than my body content. It's italic. And also importantly, I have gone into the paragraph setting and added a 6-point spacing afterwards. So if you look, we have this little blue line that defines where the header starts, and then this little bit of gap. If I didn't have that space there, I'll just show it one more time, right click, modify the style, and then under this drop down paragraph, if we didn't have that, and I hit OK, see how all of the content kind of lifts up? If we were to do this as a print book, this would just be too close. 6-point spacing maybe isn't even enough as it is, but we don't want our content too close to that header content. So we can control where this header content lives within the header by changing up the style. Oops. And so if I modify that style again, I have all the controls I want to change up how much space there is above, below, around, all of that, and we've created some space. Note that this doesn't move Lewis Carroll's name up in the header, it moves the copy down. That can shift things around in your book as well. If you do enough spacing there, you'll eventually create another page, things like that. So that's something to be aware of. Make sure you do all of that formatting before you do the page numbers so that you don't have to worry about your page numbers changing once you've got all the formatting done. All right, we'll get out of there, and we're going to look at this same file again. All the formatting cleaned up, so all of those little changes I just did are kind of taken away, and we're going to see some page numbers in here. So what I did was you know what, I'm going to just delete this one. Let's kill that one. We're going to go and reinsert it. So I've clicked into my footer. All of the settings here, different first page, different odd and even, unlinking, all of that's all preset from having done the headers previously. Now that I'm in here, I see under this header footer ribbon, there is this page numbering option. Go ahead and click that, and we've got these options here. I will say, especially when you get into PC versions, some of the menus for page numbering look a little different, particularly if you go back 5 or 6 years with your version. So if you're not seeing the exact same thing, again, just bear with us. All of these menus and all of these controls exist. It's just sometimes where to find them within Word. So I'm going to click page number, and this brings up a little menu here. So I have the option to align the page number however I want, left, right, center, inside, and outside. Inside is obviously not something you'd want to do because then when you open your book, the page numbers would be buried. Center and outside are the most common ones. I'm going to go with outside. And then notice here, show number on first page. Same thing as Lewis Carroll's name in the header on the first page of each chapter. I can choose whether or not to show that page number on that page. I want to show it there. I want to have it back in there. So I'm going to click that. And then I'm going to click format. And this is the important one. We're in section 2 of the book. Section 1 is our front matter. We do not want page numbering for our front matter. So I'm going to make sure that start at 1 is selected. And that means when I click insert, it's going to add a page number starting at 1. It's going to ignore previous pages in this file and just start at the number 1. Okay. And okay again. And there it is. Bam. And it will flow through. We'll see 3, 4, and 5, 6. And then when we get to this next one, 7, so this is the beginning of chapter 2, the next section, section 3, that needs to have numbering. We'll go ahead and delete that one again and reinsert it here. This one is very slightly different. We still want it outside, we still want it on the first page, and when I click format, what we want to do is continue from previous section. So one thing to think about here is you have the options of using that link to previous button to link your footers. I advise against that because it can cause problems with the header linking as well. The better option is to actually, instead of linking the footers together, to link the page numbering together. And that may seem really kind of nitpicky and silly. It is. It's because Microsoft Word has made this more difficult than they need to. But the important thing to think about is it's bad to link your header and footer. It complicates things. It's much easier to actually link the content, and in this case, the page numbers. So I'm going to hit continue from previous section. Okay, and okay. And bam, look at that, it's 7. If I had hit, let's say I decided I wanted to go ahead and delete this one again and reinsert it one more time. Let's say I want to mess with everybody. I want to start at 99. Hit okay. Bam, 99, and not only does it start me at 99, it continues from there. 100, 101, 102, 103, 104. Now here's the really important thing to note. Next section, next chapter, ticked up to 105. That's because I'd already gone through and inserted the page numbering in each of these footers and already told them to link to previous. So not only did this section update when I told it to start at a different number, every section after it where I had linked page numbering continued to feed from that. So that's really important to be aware of, and it's the reason we wait until this point in the file formatting to add those page numbers, because we want to make sure everything is more or less situated on the page where we want it. The page count is where we want it. Then we add the page numbers to finalize everything and get it to that point where those page numbers won't be changing or won't need to be changed. The beautiful thing is, if you do have to add some content, let's say right here, I realize that there's another sentence that should go here. And so I want to say one more sentence. And then I notice that that adds more and more stuff and it pushes everything down. And let's say it pushed this to a new page, all of those page numbers would automatically update. You just need to really be conscious of the fact that when you change things, everything can shift. And when things shift, Word can mess it up. So just really be aware and try your best, as Chelsea said, do all the writing, then do all the formatting, then insert all the content like header and footer for page number and titles in the headers. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close this one out, and we are gonna look at a fully formatted, we're on file number 7, fully formatted file here. We got our front matter. I've gone ahead and positioned this copyright content. I don't know if you noticed before, it was up here. What I did was I just selected this line, right-clicked, and went to paragraph, and I added 300 points before that line. There isn't any actual writing on this line, but I can still tell it to create space. Do not ever just put your cursor and hit enter a whole bunch to create space. That's a terrible idea because Word knows what that line size is, what that spacing is, even if there's no writing on that line. Your PDF doesn't. And so your PDF, when you export it or when we create one for you, it has to kind of guess and do its best, and it's never going to be perfect because Word is only feeding so much information out. So we really have to be careful about using the formatting as opposed to manually entering lines to create space. So just to kind of make this copyright page look the way a copyright page normally does with the copy down at the bottom, I've gone ahead and added some formatting to that paragraph, to this line, to create 300 points of space. You scroll down a little further and oh, look at that, a table of contents. So what I did here, and I'm actually just gonna, I'm gonna go ahead and delete this table of contents and reinsert it. So the first thing I did was I made this table of contents copy here, heading 2, so it's styled the same way our chapter titles are, so they look nice. And then I've gone down to another line, and I'm gonna go ahead and go to, this time I'm gonna use the insert menu on top from Mac. There is options in here to insert this table from here. I don't remember what it's under now. I'm gonna just not waste any time and go to this one. But again, a lot more options available under Mac's top level file menus. So I'm just gonna go to this indexes and tables and choose table of contents. And we'll do the fancy one. You have a ton of options here. The levels are heading styles. So we only have 2 heading styles, heading 1 and 2. We can leave it at 3, we can back it up, we'll back it up to 2. If you've got more, add more if you want. We can choose the alignment. One thing I'm going to deselect here is use hyperlinks. If you keep that selected, your Word file and your PDF that you export, each of those lines of your table of contents will be a link, and if you click them, it'll jump you to that point in the document. So that's useful for a computer, not so useful for print, so I just deselect it. We also have options where you can do even more control. Don't get into this too much until you really get comfortable with you know, the basics of Word formatting. So we'll leave that one be for now. I'm gonna hit OK, and we're gonna, oh, it still saw the other one in there, so I had to replace it. Oh, and I accidentally deleted the title. Huh, sorry about that. Anyway, I had that title, table of contents, and heading 2 selected and deleted it. Don't worry about that. We can always reinsert it. The important thing to notice here is that the Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, the stuff that I just highlighted there, that's the front matter. That's my half title and full title. Because they're in heading 1, it pulled them into the table of contents. You do have options to tell it to only touch certain heading styles. I find it's easy too to just go ahead and delete that. Oops. Bam, deleted. I'm going to create a line here and maybe just put table of contents back in. I won't go through the exercise of styling it too heavily. We'll just quickly kind of drop it back in there. Make it a heading 2. Bam, look at that. We're back to the way we were. You have the option of also styling all of this. This is not, you'll notice it doesn't grab one of these styles. It's its own unique style for table of contents. So you'll have to go through and finalize it to get it set up the way that you want it to look, distinct from other styles. I would actually recommend not just using like normal or something. You want this to look a little different, and it's also important that you have your page numbers the way you want them. I really like having this right justified for them. That's the default, but you've got a lot of controls about how you set that up. Okay, last thing, we've got this file fully formatted. We've got section breaks going to the next page at the end of every chapter, so that every chapter is its own section. We've used that control to create unique headers that have the chapter titles in them. We've then gone in and created a chain of page numbers that are all linked to each other without linking the footers, so that we have control over that page numbering without having to do it to every single footer every single time. And this would also be the point where, of course, I would check the final formatting of my normal style. This is something to think about earlier on as well as you're going through the process, how you want this to all look. But of course, at this point, I would want to make sure, you know, does this line want to be right here? Do the real fine tooth comb thing. See how I've broken up some lines here? Maybe I want this line to be broken up similarly and add another space. All of those sorts of things. Go through, do your final check, give it a real thorough review. You see this kind of line all by itself, that's that orphan control I mentioned earlier. That's very much a advanced level Word formatting thing that we can get into separately, but this might be the kind of thing you don't want. You'd rather push this onto the next page, and there are controls in Word to manage that. So this is the point when you can really go through and check on all of these final things, make sure everything is lined up correctly, make sure you don't have any section breaks at the end of a chapter that are situated way down on the bottom of the page that may push to another page and create a blank. All right, and so we've done all that. I'm going to click File, and the last step is going to be making this into a PDF. So Word gives you two options. You can do a save as, or you can do a print. Quickly to go through them, I'm going to click print. This does a nice little preview of what our file will look like. There's all of this. I probably would have done a little bit more formatting with my table of contents, but otherwise I like this. Here's what I would do to make a PDF instead of actually printing it, because I don't want to send it to the printer in the office here. I feel like our supplies people would be a little mad if I printed off 92 pages of A5 paper. Instead, I'm just going to click Save as PDF. Jumps out this nice little metadata window. It pulled in this title and author because I've added them previously when I set up this file. You can also throw in some keywords, and I'm defining where I want to save it into a folder. Click Save, and there it is. I've got it. I'm going to go ahead and open up my menu here, and we'll see. Here's my PDF. So I'm just looking at it in a max preview, which just lets me look at the PDF. But you know what? Let's actually get it open real quick in Adobe. So we'll just open an Acrobat Reader. And there it is. Let's shrink it down so it's a manageable size. And maybe we'll go for a 2-page view, side by side. There it is. This is what it will look like as a PDF. Last thing to think about as you're viewing this in your PDF reader, and this is Adobe Acrobat Reader, it's the free version, so anyone can use this. You really want to notice that your page numbers here are in the inside edge. The reason for that, even though we set them to outside, is that this page, this very first page, your half title, when you print the book is actually going to be on the right. And that's because it is opposite the inside cover. It's a little hard to think about when you're just staring at a file on a screen, but you have to remember that this page is going to be on the right. So every single page shifts one space right. It can be really awkward, and it's one of the things that Word could do a much better job of showing you, but they don't. So we have to manage it ourselves and figure out how to really make sure we know what it's going to look like. So when you're done formatting a Word file and you have your page numbering set to outside, the way they're displayed right here is accurate and correct, and we just have to remember that when it prints, it will be on the outside. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close that out, and we're gonna jump back into our slide deck for some final little bits of information here. So let's just get that back up. Here we have our Frontmatter notes again, and then we're just gonna step on to the next section, and I'm gonna hand it over to Lauren to do some takeaways.
Okay, guys, so I know we just threw a whole bunch of information at you, so don't forget that all of this will be available on our Lulu blog and on YouTube, and we're also going to email you a link to the whole presentation soon. We also have a couple of additional resources that I'll go over with you on the next slide. So we just wanted to go over some of the key takeaways in case anything got lost in all of that. The most important thing to remember is that file formatting is one of the very last steps when you're creating your project. Make sure you've done all of your writing and your editing and that you're completely satisfied with the body of text before you begin formatting it. And of course, you want to make sure you safeguard all that hard work you put into it. So make sure that you save your file between every step of the formatting process so you don't have to start over from square one if something goes wrong. I also personally would recommend that you save a separate unformatted copy of it just in case you ever need to go back and reference that unformatted body of text. You never know when that will come in handy. Finally, make sure that you keep a close eye on your file as you're moving through the formatting process. You never know when the smallest change will move everything around and affect the whole book, so make sure you're reviewing your work thoroughly and often. Okay, and as I promised, we have plenty of additional resources available to help you create a bookstore quality project. We've highlighted a couple of formatting specific blog posts here and included a link to including a link to download free PDF guides in our Lulu toolkit. So be sure you check out the Lulu blog and Lulu University online for other great tips, tricks, and insights.
All right, everyone. That's it for our MS Word formatting webinar. That hopefully answered some of your basic questions about getting header and footer content, separating your chapters into different sections so you can control them individually, and how important it is to get Frontmatter in there and use Word's built-in formatting, the page breaks, rather than manual formatting. It looks like we've got about 10 minutes left, so we're going to go ahead and have Graham throw some questions at us if we have any, and we'll try and answer those.
Sure, yeah. So we only got a couple. There's, I think 2 just rolled in just a second ago here. The first one, Carolyn asked, you had mentioned a couple fonts that you wouldn't use when setting it up to print. Are there any fonts specifically that you see used pretty often as a standard as far as printing goes?
Absolutely. So I will say too, we have, I'm not going to be able to run through the whole list off the top of my head, but we have, I think, 10 or 11 preferred fonts that are listed on our knowledge base on lulu.com. Arial is a very common one, Times New Roman. Word defaults to, I believe it's Cambria. I don't like that one as much personally, but it does print well, and it's a pretty common one. One you'll see a lot in traditionally published books in the primarily fantasy and literature genre, is Baskerville. One of the ones I used for a heading style there. It's important to kind of just do some best practices. I would say do some research. Think about the genre your book is in. Google that genre and best fonts for it, and then just do some research. Find books that you can compare that font to, so see it how it's been printed previously by other authors. And then the other thing to be aware of is if you're using an uncommon font, if you found a font that just really pops for you and you like it, it needs to be embedded in the final PDF. And that goes beyond Word's formatting. When you export a Word file, it does do its best to embed all of your fonts, but it only can embed those kind of known ones, the ones that Word is aware of and has kind of had built into it. It's possible to add fonts to Word, but that's, again, one of those kind of advanced techniques that takes a little bit more getting into. But I would say most common would be things like Arial and Times New Roman, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but.
Sure. Awesome. Yeah. And so let's see, we had another person reach out and saying, Robin asked, after you save to a PDF and put it in the Lulu template, does it change at all?
It seems like a wrong process, right? We would want them to use the template to get to the PDF.
Yes. So we have templates for almost any file type. We started from our MS Word A5 template, which you can download from the website when you select that book size. That is a Word template that gives you your margins and your page size preset, and you just want to make sure to copy all of your file's contents into that to start. Once you've exported to a PDF, you shouldn't need to put it into another template. We do offer PDF and InDesign templates as well, so you can, but ideally you're doing all the formatting and then you're pushing it out to a PDF file that is done, that is ready to come to us.
Awesome. Let's see. S. Azuma asks, can you say a little bit about bleed? What is it exactly and why is it important?
I could talk about bleed for hours. So I'm going to start by saying I just actually wrote a blog post on the Lulu blog. That's blog.lulu.com. There's my shameless promotion for myself. That is very, it tries to get a little bit more in depth about bleed. But to briefly answer this without taking up everybody's afternoon, and I also want to go eat my lunch. It is a added margin to the final printed page size that your printer trims. So the best example is the common 6x9 US trade size. It's our most commonly printed book size. That is the final size of the book. So when you pick up the actual book out of the mail, the box in the mail, and you look at it, it's 6x9. When our printer prints the pages for that book, it prints them at 6.25 by 9.25. It adds 1/8 of an inch on each side of that rectangular page. And the reason for that is so that it can trim them down to that final size. So if you look at a book, the vast majority of them are nice and smooth on all 4 edges. It's very clean. To achieve that, it has to cut them down. And for most books like Alice in Wonderland that I was just putting together, my margins are white. So including the bleed yourself isn't as important because we will add it as a white margin, as 1/8 of an inch white margin around all 4 sides of your PDF, because we have to, because our printers have to be able to trim that off to finalize your book. So if you just have white margins, you don't have to worry about it. If you have content, images, if you've got pages that are full color all the way to the edge, you have to include that extra 1/8 of an inch, and you have to include your color, your image, whatever it is that goes to the edge of the page. It has to be that extra size so that when we trim it down, you don't see a little white margin around the edge. We are really forgiving about bleed in the way that Lulu is set up to try and make it as accessible for folks as possible. But I actually very much recommend always, always, always just create your files with bleed. Don't think of a 6x9 as a 6x9 page size file. Think of it as 6 1/4 by 9 1/4. Always just kind of get yourself in that mindset to think about how you're going to create the file for printing, not how you're going to create it for the final product. That's kind of the printer's job. Okay. And again, check out that blog post and our knowledge base. We really kind of dig into it with some images and show people how to handle that.
Awesome. Yeah, this is actually a pretty good question here too. So what about adding reference material? So where should you actually include this? And then should you also change your font for this as well?
All right, I'm gonna make a note of that for this. It seems like I need to do some content on some advanced formatting for Word, because that's another one that I would consider in line with drop caps and orphan widow control for your content is reference material. I'm not going to dive into another file and share it again because we don't have a lot of time, but there are controls for adding footnotes and endnotes and linking them with little superscript numbers right on the page. Anyone that's ever been on Wikipedia, you see those little links in parentheses next to content, and then when you click it, it takes you down to the source material at the bottom of the page. Word does a pretty good job of making that stuff available and accessible. It's a little bit more complex than I think I'm comfortable trying to answer in a few minutes, but when I write this blog post with some of these answers later this week, including the video, I'll try and get into a little bit more detail there. Essentially, Word can do it. Word makes it relatively easy, and the most important thing to think about is how you're adding your breaks. As I was showing earlier, if you add a section break at the end of a chapter on its own line, it can occasionally push to another page and create a blank page. Similarly, if you have endnotes and footnotes, those breaks could potentially push your footnotes to its own page too, which can really be unappealing to look at in the printed product. So there are some little kind of granular things to get into with that, but the most important thing is going through the basic process that Word gives you for entering them, which is pretty simple, and then very, very carefully reviewing your PDF afterwards to make sure they're where they want to be.
Right, that makes sense. I think the rest of the questions that we have here might take a little bit more time than we have available to actually wrap things up here. But like we mentioned earlier in the presentation, we will be sending out an email that will include a copy of the webinar as well as questions or answers to all the questions that you asked throughout the event. So keep an eye out for that. Hopefully we'll be sending that in the next couple of days here or so. Anything else?
Yeah, I'll run down every question that we've got in here. So if anyone has any, this is your last chance, drop another question in there. We'll run through all of those on our blog, ideally by the end of this week. If not very early next week, we'll have that up so that you can go back and watch the video again, look at the slide deck, and then get some answers to those questions. And if I do a poor job of answering them, there's a comment section. You can just yell at me and I'll try harder. All right, everyone, I think that does it. And we're going to let everyone go and have some lunch. Thank you so much for joining us. And anyone else have anything else to offer before I can see a lot of shaking heads? Okay. Well, thank you again, everyone. And yeah, take care.